I never believed in life after death. As a college athlete, my world revolved around touchdowns and textbooks. But one fateful night, a head-on collision changed everything. As paramedics declared me dead at the scene, I found myself engulfed in a realm of gentle light. The presence I felt there was unmistakable. It was Jesus Christ himself. In that moment, I realized my entire existence had been leading to this spiritual awakening. My alarm shattered the pre-dawn silence, pulling me from a restless sleep. At 22, my life felt like a carefully balanced act, a non-stop symphony of athletics and academics. Each day tested my endurance and determination, leaving little room for anything else. I moved on autopilot, changing into my workout gear as the cool air raised goosebumps on my skin. The weight of my textbooks in my backpack reminded me of the duality of my college experience. Football and academics, two demanding forces pulling me in different directions, yet somehow, I managed to juggle them both as I headed to the athletic facility. The next few hours passed in a blur of sweat and focus. I pushed my body to its limits, my mind already drifting to the upcoming game and the pressure to deliver. After practice, I barely had time to shower before sprinting to my first class, making it just as the professor began speaking. Lectures, study groups, and team meetings filled the hours. My mind raced to keep up, absorbing theories, formulas, and strategies. Every moment felt like a test, not just in the classroom or on the field, but of my ability to keep my head above water. Every choice, every game, every exam felt like the deciding factor in whether I succeeded or failed. As the day gave way to evening, I found myself in the library. The soft glow of my laptop screen illuminated the books spread out in front of me. Fatigue crept in, tugging at my eyelids, but I couldn't afford to stop. Falling behind wasn't an option when so much was riding on my performance. It was in those quiet moments that I sometimes felt something nagging at the edges of my mind, a sense that there might be more to life than touchdowns and textbooks. The thought was fleeting, a whisper I didn't dare linger on. I'd quickly shove it aside, reminding myself of the goals I needed to focus on. When I finally stumbled back into my dorm room in the early hours of the morning, exhaustion seeped into every part of me. I collapsed into bed, setting my alarm for another pre-dawn wake-up call, the cycle ready to start all over again. I had no idea my carefully constructed world was about to be upended. In just a few hours, everything I thought I knew about life, death, and existence itself would be thrown into question. But for now, I slept, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to engulf me. The clock on my dashboard read 2:37 a.m. as I drove through the empty streets of Detroit. My eyes fought to stay focused on the road ahead, but my mind replayed snippets of football plays and equations from my last study session. The week had been a blur. Intense practices, grueling exams, and endless late-night cramming sessions. I felt the rhythmic hum of the engine beneath me, a steady lull that threatened to pull me into a dangerous half-sleep. The streetlights above cast long, eerie shadows on the asphalt, making the edges of my vision flicker with movement. I approached an intersection, my thoughts miles away. I didn't notice the headlights speeding toward me from the cross street. In the blink of an eye, everything changed. My stomach dropped as I saw the other car barreling toward me. For a split second, my eyes locked onto the oncoming headlights, and a terrible realization hit me. I couldn't stop what was about to happen. Time slowed to a crawl as the vehicles collided. The screech of tires, the crunch of metal, and the violent jolt of impact overwhelmed my senses. My world spun violently as my car was tossed in a brutal, chaotic dance. The airbag exploded in my face, filling the cabin with the acrid smell of chemicals. Blood trickled into my mouth, the taste sharp and metallic. When the car finally came to a halt, an eerie silence fell over everything. Steam hissed from the crumpled hood, and shards of glass sparkled on the pavement like tiny diamonds. My body felt broken, trapped in the wreckage. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. My chest heaved with shallow, ragged breaths, and I felt warm blood dripping down my forehead. In the distance, I heard sirens wailing, growing louder as they raced toward me. Help was on the way, but it didn't feel real. I was slipping away, my consciousness flickering like a dying light bulb. I hovered on the edge of oblivion, aware of how fragile everything was. It was as if I stood at the doorway to something vast and unknowable. The crash had shattered not just my car, but the illusion of control I had always clung to. When the first responders arrived, their flashing lights painted the scene in pulses of red and blue. I could hear voices, urgent, professional, but somehow distant, as though they were speaking from another world. I wanted to cry out, to move, to let them know I was still here, but I couldn't. As they worked to free me from the wreckage, I realized something. My journey had already begun. While my body remained trapped in the twisted metal, my consciousness was starting to drift. I was being pulled into something far beyond the world of sirens and shattered glass. This was the beginning of an odyssey that would challenge everything I thought I understood about reality, life, and faith. In the aftermath of the violent collision, I could faintly sense the chaos around me as the emergency responders converged on the scene. Their vehicles cast eerie red and blue lights across the wreckage. My car, barely recognizable now, was a mangled shell. I vaguely heard someone, a woman named Sarah, taking charge. She directed her team to stabilize the vehicle and prepare to get me out. Every second felt like it stretched on forever. I couldn't move or speak, but I was aware of the firefighters working to cut through the twisted metal that trapped me. The acrid smell of gasoline and burnt rubber filled the air. When they finally reached me, I felt Sarah's hands, trained and deliberate, checking for signs of life. My body felt foreign, heavy and distant, but I knew my face was pale and streaked with blood. I heard her murmuring to someone about my weak and erratic vital signs. There was a grim determination in her voice that I clung to, even though everything around me was slipping away. As the team worked to stabilize me, I could sense the tension. Each movement they made was careful, calculated, and filled with urgency. Eventually, they managed to free me from the wreckage and transfer me to an ambulance. My body felt as though it was failing me. I could barely breathe, and my pulse felt like a faint drumbeat. I vaguely registered Sarah's voice calling for a defibrillator, her tone sharp with urgency. The shocks came in waves, 1, 2, but I couldn't feel them. The third attempt brought only a heavy silence that seemed to fill the entire space. Even as my body lay still, Sarah's hands continued with CPR, each movement growing more desperate. I heard her call for epinephrine, her voice a lifeline I couldn't reach. And then, her words broke through. Time of death, 3:17 a.m. The finality in her voice echoed through me. It wasn't a scream or a shout. It was quiet, almost reverent, as though even she couldn't believe what she was saying. Everything grew silent. I had no idea what was coming next, but something in me knew this wasn't the end. Beyond the sirens, the flashing lights, and the relentless efforts of the medical team, I felt myself slipping into something far greater, a place beyond anything I had ever known. Between heartbeats, I found myself drifting into a realm of gentle light. It wasn't sudden or jarring. It felt like a natural step forward, as though this was where I was meant to go all along. The ambulance, the chaos, my broken body, they were all behind me now, distant echoes of a world I was no longer tethered to. I floated in a sea of light and peace, free of pain or fear. The sensation was unlike anything I could describe, as if the light wasn't just something I could see. It was something I could hear, touch, even feel within my very being. It enveloped me completely, soothing every part of me that had been fractured or hurt. As I drifted further, I realized that I was no longer bound by the limitations of my physical body. I existed as pure awareness, free and untethered, yet fully myself. It was exhilarating and disorienting all at once. My mind raced with questions, trying to make sense of this reality that defied everything I had ever known. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming at first, but fear had no place here. It simply couldn't exist in this realm of serenity. I noticed subtle variations in the light around me. It shifted and pulsed, forming patterns of beauty that words could never capture. Colors beyond anything I'd ever seen danced at the edges of my awareness, as if teasing me with the idea that there was far more to existence than I had ever imagined. Time lost all meaning here. I couldn't tell if I had been in this place for seconds or centuries. Every moment felt like eternity, yet everything seemed to collapse into a single perfect instant. I began to understand that time itself was a construct of the physical world, something that didn't hold sway in this place where all moments coexisted simultaneously. As wonder replaced my confusion, I felt a presence around me. It wasn't a voice or a form, but an undeniable sense of acceptance and understanding. It was as though this presence knew everything about me, every thought, every action, every secret, and loved me unconditionally anyway. That was when I knew. I had crossed the threshold between life and death. This was the other side, the reality that lay beyond the veil of existence. And as that understanding took root, I felt a gentle pull, an invitation to move further into this extraordinary realm. I let myself follow, filled with awe and anticipation, ready to discover what lay ahead. As I surrendered to the pull, I felt myself enveloped by something beyond comprehension. It wasn't just light or warmth. It was an all-encompassing presence that radiated a love so profound, it shattered every wall I had ever built around myself. This presence wasn't just around me. It was within me, flowing through every part of my being. The sensation was overwhelming, yet comforting. For the first time in my life, I felt completely known and accepted, as if nothing I had ever done or been could diminish the love I was being offered. Years of striving, struggling, and trying to prove myself, whether on the football field or in the classroom, melted away. All the burdens I had carried seemed so small in the face of this divine acceptance. It felt like coming home, as if I had finally found where I truly belonged. As I basked in this love, I began to perceive something deeper within the presence. There was wisdom here, compassion that knew no bounds, and a love so vast it encompassed all of creation. Memories of childhood Sunday school lessons stirred in my mind, long-buried thoughts that suddenly felt vibrant and alive. Then, like a veil being lifted, I understood. This presence, it was Jesus Christ. Not as a figure from stories or sermons, but as the embodiment of the divine love I was experiencing. The recognition wasn't shocking or sudden. It felt like something I had always known, buried deep within my soul. Gratitude welled up inside me. How had I been given this gift, this chance to experience something so extraordinary? All the worries and fears of my earthly life seemed inconsequential now. I felt humbled, awed, and at peace in a way I had never known. But even as I rested in this divine presence, I sensed that my journey wasn't over. Jesus didn't speak, but his presence seemed to beckon me forward, inviting me to explore more. I felt ready, eager, even, to see what lay ahead, knowing that whatever came next would be steeped in the same love and understanding I had already experienced. As the divine presence enveloped me, a kaleidoscope of memories unfolded before me. Every moment of my life, from the mundane to the monumental, seemed to hold a hidden significance I had never imagined. I wasn't just observing, I was reliving it all with a clarity that felt almost surreal. I saw myself as a child, wobbling on unsteady legs as I took my first steps across our living room. My mother's smile was radiant, filled with the kind of love that only years later I realized came with deep sacrifices. In that moment, I felt her pride, her hope, and her endless patience in a way I never had before. The memories unfolded one after the other. I was back on the high school football field, scoring the winning touchdown during the championship game. The rush of adrenaline and pride surged through me again. But this time, I saw more than just my victory. I saw how it had inspired one of my teammates, who had been struggling with his own challenges. That moment, for him, had been a lifeline, giving him the strength to persevere when everything felt too much. I wasn't spared the harder memories either. I saw the times I'd hurt others, arguments with my parents, moments when my ambition pushed me to be unkind, times when I'd chosen selfishness over compassion. These weren't shown to me with judgment or condemnation. Instead, they were bathed in light, a kind of understanding that transformed them into lessons. I could see how they had shaped me, and I felt an overwhelming sense of forgiveness, not just from this divine presence, but from myself. The deeper I went, the more I began to see the intricate connections that wove my life together. The smallest gestures, a smile to a stranger, a kind word to a friend, had rippled outward in ways I could never have imagined. I watched how a simple act of helping a struggling classmate with homework had set off a domino effect, touching lives I hadn't even known existed. It wasn't just the good moments that mattered. The grueling practices, sleepless nights, and moments of doubt had all been part of a greater purpose. Each one had prepared me, shaped me, and strengthened me for what lay ahead. As I witnessed this incredible tapestry of my life, an awe-filled understanding dawned on me. Every event, every person, every choice had its place, like notes in a symphony. It was breathtaking. Gratitude filled my heart as I realized how much beauty and meaning existed, even in the most ordinary moments. And then, as the review began to fade, I felt myself expanding beyond my own story. It was as if I stood on the edge of something vast and unknowable, a deeper truth about life, death, and existence itself waiting just beyond my reach. It wasn't long before I faced a choice, one that filled me with both peace and longing. The spiritual realm surrounded me with its eternal warmth, an invitation to stay. But there was also a tug, faint at first, growing stronger with each passing moment. Images of my family came to me, so vivid and clear. My parents' faces etched with worry, my siblings' smiles, the laughter of friends I hadn't hugged nearly enough. I felt the weight of those connections, the relationships I had barely begun to explore, and the love I still had to give. The pull wasn't just emotional. It was as if some deeper wisdom was guiding me, whispering that my time wasn't done. There was more to do, more to learn, more to share. My near-death experience, I realized, wasn't the end. It was a turning point, a second chance to live with intention. I thought back to the life review. For the first time, I truly understood how much my actions mattered. There was so much potential left, so many opportunities to bring love and kindness into the world. Staying here in this realm of light would mean leaving that potential unfulfilled. It wasn't an easy decision. Leaving behind the peace I felt in this place, the all-encompassing love, felt like stepping away from paradise. But as much as I longed to stay, I knew my heart was calling me back. I chose to return, carrying with me a determination to make the most of the life I'd been given. As soon as I made the choice, everything began to shift. The spiritual realm started to fade, its brilliance dimming as I felt myself being pulled back to the physical world. The contrast was sharp, almost jarring, but I held on to the profound understanding I had gained. When my eyes finally fluttered open, the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital ceiling greeted me. I blinked, disoriented, as the sterile smells and steady beeping of monitors replaced the warmth and serenity I had just left. Awareness returned in waves, along with the ache that pulsed through every part of my body. I tried to move but felt too weak. Images of the crash came rushing back. The screeching tires, the shattering glass, the sound of metal twisting in ways it wasn't meant to. A nurse approached my bedside, her expression a mix of relief and concern. "Welcome back," she said softly. "You've been through a lot. Try not to move too much. You're still recovering." As she explained the extent of my injuries, my mind wandered back to what I had experienced. The stark difference between the light-filled realm and this hospital room was overwhelming. I closed my eyes, holding on to the sense of peace I had felt there, determined not to let it slip away. Over the next few days, doctors and nurses came and went, calling my recovery miraculous. They spoke of how close I had come to death and marveled at my progress. But I knew there was more to it than luck or medicine. I had been given a second chance. Each day, as my body healed, I found myself grappling with the enormity of what I had seen. The trivial concerns that once consumed me now seemed laughable. Life, I realized, was about so much more than personal success or fleeting pleasures. It was about connection, kindness, and purpose. The sense of responsibility grew within me. I had been given this experience for a reason. I didn't know how, but I felt a deep calling to share what I had learned. Looking out the hospital window, the world seemed different, more alive, more vibrant. Every face I saw, every interaction I witnessed, seemed to hold meaning. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. I would have to rebuild, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. But I was ready. As I drifted off to sleep, the boundary between the hospital room and that realm of light blurred once more, reminding me that those two realities were not so separate after all. As I lay in my hospital bed, the stark white walls seemed to pulse with newfound meaning. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, which I once found irritating, now resonated as a reminder of the precious gift of life. I turned my gaze to the window, watching the world outside continue its daily dance, seemingly oblivious to the profound transformation happening within me. My perception of existence had irrevocably shifted. Contemplating this newfound perspective, I marveled at the stark contrast between who I was before and who I had become. Just days ago, my mind was consumed by the mundane concerns of college life, exams, football practice, social outings. My spiritual life had been little more than an afterthought, something I half-heartedly maintained to appease my grandmother. Now, faith pulsed through me with a vitality that rivaled my own blood. At times, the enormity of this change overwhelmed me. How could I possibly integrate such a profound spiritual awakening into my daily life? The world outside my hospital room felt familiar, yet alien. I imagined returning to campus, walking the same paths and attending the same classes, all while carrying the weight of this extraordinary experience. Would my friends and teammates understand? Or would they dismiss my story as the ramblings of someone traumatized? As these questions churned in my mind, I found myself turning to prayer with a frequency and intensity that would have astonished my former self. The connection I had felt to the divine remained, a fragile yet unbreakable thread linking me to something greater. I clung to it like a lifeline, drawing strength and comfort from the memory of that all-encompassing love. As the days passed and my physical strength returned, my anticipation grew. I knew the true test of my transformation lay beyond these sheltered walls. How would this newfound faith manifest in my daily life? Could I find the courage to share my experience with others, standing firm in my convictions despite skepticism or ridicule? Despite the uncertainty, a sense of purpose began to crystallize within me. I was alive for a reason. My survival was more than just a medical miracle. It was a calling. As I envisioned my future, I no longer saw myself solely as a student or an athlete, but as someone entrusted with a profound truth about the nature of existence and the reality of divine love. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I closed my eyes and offered a silent prayer of gratitude. I knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face the challenges. This experience had become the cornerstone of my identity, shaping the course of my life. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself for the journey ahead, knowing nothing would ever be the same, and for the first time, feeling truly alive. My heart raced as I stood before my teammates in the locker room. The familiar scent of sweat and athletic tape filled the air, but everything felt different. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for what I was about to do. "Guys, I need to tell you something," I began, my voice wavering. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to me. Concern and curiosity were written across their faces. I launched into my story, recounting the car crash and my journey to the brink of death. As I spoke about the realm of gentle light and the overwhelming sense of divine love, I saw their expressions shift. Skepticism crept into some faces, while others widened in wonder. "I know this might sound unbelievable," I admitted, struggling to find the right words, but it was more real than anything I've ever experienced. The silence that followed was heavy. Finally, Mike, our team captain, broke it.
David, are you sure this wasn't just some kind of hallucination from the trauma?
I had anticipated this reaction, but it still stung. I thought of all the research I'd done since my experience, learning how many near-death accounts face similar doubts. I get why you'd think that, I said, my voice growing steadier. But this wasn't a dream or a trick of the brain. It's changed me. The way I see the world, my purpose, my faith. It's all different now. As I continued to share, I could see the impact my words were having. Some of my teammates shifted uncomfortably, while others leaned in, their eyes softening as they sensed the sincerity in my voice. Chris, my roommate, spoke up.
I've got to say, Dave, you do seem different. I've never seen you this passionate about anything before.
The conversation that followed was intense, filled with questions, doubts, and moments of genuine curiosity. I drew on every ounce of conviction I had as I tried to articulate the ineffable. I described the life review I'd experienced, the interconnectedness of all things, and the profound understanding I had gained about existence. By the end, I knew I hadn't convinced everyone, but I had at least given them something to think about. Some teammates even approached me privately later, sharing their own questions and experiences with spirituality. Walking out of the locker room, I felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. This was just the beginning of my journey to share my story. The skepticism I faced was challenging, but it also strengthened my resolve. Stepping into the sunlight, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was committed to sharing my truth, no matter what. And I couldn't help but wonder how my story might touch lives in ways I couldn't yet imagine. My near-death experience started rippling outward, touching the lives of those around me in ways I never expected. As I shared my story, I began noticing subtle shifts in the people I interacted with, weaving a tapestry of reactions that both fascinated and challenged me. One afternoon, my biology professor, Dr. Simmons, pulled me aside after class. He was a staunch rationalist who had initially dismissed my story outright. But as we spoke, I noticed something change in his demeanor. "I've always believed science could explain everything," he admitted, his voice laced with doubt. "But your experience, it's making me question things I've taken for granted." That conversation led to several late-night discussions between us, exploring the intersection of science and spirituality in ways I never imagined possible. In the locker room one day, I overheard Marcus, one of my teammates, confiding in another player. He spoke quietly about feeling his grandmother's presence after she had passed. Seeing the relief in his eyes, as though a weight had been lifted, was deeply moving. Of course, not everyone was so receptive. Sarah, my study partner, remained skeptical and insisted that near-death experiences were just tricks of a dying brain. But even she wasn't immune to curiosity. I caught her lingering in the spirituality section of the library, flipping through books on consciousness and the afterlife when she thought no one was looking. Word of my experience spread beyond campus. A local grief support group invited me to share my story, and I saw how deeply it resonated with people. Afterward, a middle-aged woman who had recently lost her husband approached me, tears in her eyes.
"Thank you,"
she said, her voice trembling.
"What you shared gave me hope."
The ripple effect of my experience was both exhilarating and overwhelming. I felt a profound sense of purpose in sharing my journey, but also a weighty responsibility. Every time I spoke, I wondered about the long-term impact of my words. Would they inspire true spiritual growth in others, or just spark fleeting curiosity? As I prepared for another speaking engagement, I reflected on these questions. Each time I recounted my journey, I felt the potential to catalyze change in others. The path ahead was uncertain, but I felt a deep peace, knowing I was where I was meant to be. As my story spread further, it began challenging deeply entrenched assumptions about spirituality and science. What had started as my personal journey of awakening was now igniting discussions in living rooms, classrooms, and online communities. People were grappling with questions they had never considered, and their worldviews were shifting under the weight of my testimony. Even within academic circles, the conversation was changing. Dr. Mark Henderson, a physicist studying quantum mechanics, reached out to me after hearing about my story. He told me that aspects of my experience echoed certain theoretical models in his field. It's almost as if your story bridges the gap between spirituality and science, he said thoughtfully. My testimony also inspired others who had undergone similar near-death experiences to step forward. Support groups reported an uptick in attendance, and online forums buzzed with new discussions about consciousness and the afterlife. It felt like my story had become part of a larger movement, one that was forcing society to confront the possibility of something beyond the material. Still, skepticism persisted. Critics were quick to dismiss my experience as anecdotal. They pointed to studies suggesting near-death experiences could be replicated with certain drugs or extreme physical conditions. It was frustrating, but I understood their perspective. After all, I'd been a skeptic myself not so long ago. Despite the ongoing debates, my story continued to capture the public's imagination. Books on near-death experiences climbed bestseller lists, and documentaries exploring the phenomenon drew massive audiences. The sheer hunger for meaning in a chaotic, often indifferent world was undeniable. I never anticipated being at the center of such a movement. My testimony was sparking a deeper exploration of spirituality and consciousness, and I was humbled by the role I'd been thrust into. As I prepared for another interview, I took a moment to reflect. My story was just one thread in a vast, interconnected tapestry of human experiences. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that humanity was on the cusp of a profound shift in understanding its place in the universe. Whatever the future held, I was certain that the journey sparked by my near-death experience was far from over. Looking back, I see how profoundly that near-death experience changed me. It reshaped my understanding of life, death, and the very nature of existence. What began as an isolated, deeply personal event has become an invitation, for me and for others, to reflect on our beliefs and assumptions about the world. My journey challenges us to look beyond the material, to consider the possibility that our existence extends far beyond what we can see or measure. As I've shared my story, I've seen it inspire countless others to explore their own spiritual paths, to open their minds to the profound mysteries that surround us. Even now, I feel a renewed sense of wonder about the depths of human consciousness and the vast unknowns that lie beyond our everyday understanding. My life will never be the same, and for that, I am endlessly grateful.